Continuing Part 3, The Great Heroes Before the Trojan War, Perseus. It's Chapter 9, so this is Part B. The only sure way to escape that fate was for the king to have Danae instantly put to death, taking no chances. But, seeing to it himself, this Acrisius would not do. His fatherly affection was not strong, as events proved, but his fear of the entities was. They visited with terrible punishment those who shed the blood of kindred. Acrisius did not dare slay his daughter. Instead, he had a house built all of bronze and sunk underground, but with part of the roof open to the sky so that the light and air could come through. Here he shut her up and guarded her. Well, that differs with what they have here, which both old and new talks about hating and even killing your own family. So Danae endured the beautiful to change the glad daylight for brass-bound walls, and in that chamber secret as the grave she lived a prisoner. Yet to her came Zeus in the golden rain, as she sat there through the long days and hours, with nothing to do, nothing to see, except the clouds moving by overhead. A mysterious thing happened. A shower of gold fell from the sky and filled her chamber. How it was revealed to her that it was Zeus who had visited her in this shape, we are not told, but she knew that the child she bore was his son. For a time she kept his birth secret from her father, but it became increasingly difficult to do so in the narrow limits of that bronze house, and finally, one day, the little boy, his name was Perseus, was discovered by his grandfather. "Your child!" cried Acrisius in great anger. "Who is his father?" But when Danae answered proudly, "Zeus," he would not believe her. One thing only was he sure of, that the boy's life was a terrible danger to his own. He was afraid to kill him, for the same reason that had kept him from killing her, fear of Zeus and the Furies who pursue such murderers. But he could not kill them outright. He could not put them in the way of tolerably certain death. He had a great chest made, and the two placed in it. Then it was taken out to sea and cast into the water. In that strange boat, Danae sat with her little son. The daylight faded, and she was alone on the sea. When, in the carven chest, the winds and waves struck fear into her heart, she put her arms, not without tears, round Perseus tenderly. She said, "O son, what grief is mine? But you sleep softly, little child." Sunk deep in rest within your cheerless home, only a box, brass-bound, the night, this darkness visible. The scudding waves so near to your soft curls, the shrill voice of the wind you do not heed, nestled in your red cloak, fair little face. Through the night, in the tossing chest, she listened to the waters that seemed always about to wash over them. The dawn came, but with no comfort to her, for she could not see it. Neither could she see that around them there were islands, rising high above the sea, many islands. All she knew was that presently a wave seemed to lift them and carry them swiftly on, and then, retreating, leave them on something solid and motionless. They had made land. They were safe from the sea, but they were still in the chest, with no way to get out. Fate willed it, or perhaps Zeus, who up to now had done little for his love and his child. that they should be discovered by a good man, a fisherman named Dictys. He came upon the great box and broke it open and took the pitiful cargo home to his wife, who was as kind as he. They had no children. They cared for Danae and Perseus as if they were their own. The two lived there many years, Danae content to let her son follow the fisherman's humble trade out of harm's way, but in the end more trouble came. Polydectes, the ruler of the little island, was the brother of Dictys, but he was a cruel and ruthless man. He seems to have taken no notice of the mother and son for a long time, but at last Danae attracted his attention. She was still radiantly beautiful, even though Perseus by now was full grown, and Polydectes fell in love with her. He wanted her, but he did not want her son, and he set himself to think out a way of getting rid of him. There were some fearsome monsters called Gorgons, who lived on an island and were known far and wide because of their deadly power. Polydectes evidently talked to Perseus about them. He probably told him that he would rather have the head of one of them than anything else in the world. This seemed practically certain from the plan he devised for killing Perseus. He announced that he was about to be married, and he called for his friends together for a celebration, including Perseus in the invitation. Each guest, as was customary, brought a gift for the bride-to-be except Perseus alone. He had nothing he could give. He was young and proud and keenly mortified. He stood up before them all and did exactly what the king had hoped he would do, declaring that he would give him a present better than any there. He would go off and kill Medusa and bring back her head as his gift. Nothing could have suited the king better. No one in his senses would have made such a proposal. Medusa was one of the Gorgons. And they are three, the Gorgons, each with wings and snaky hair, most horrible to mortals, whom no man shall behold and draw again the breath of life. Looking at them kills. Okay, I thought they were going to exclude that part, but I can't help but think this is linked to some of the older cults of the island of Malta and stuff like this. We Greeks are better than they were, and but it could be spiritual beings that, what does the Bible say about no man shall behold God and live, or that sort of stuff. For the reason that whoever looked at them was turned instantly into stone. It seemed that Perseus had been led by his angry pride into making an empty boast. No man unaided to kill Medusa. But Perseus was saved from his folly. Two great entities were watching over him. He took ship as soon as he left the king's hall, not daring to see his mother first and tell her what he intended. And he sailed to Greece to learn where the three monsters were found. He went to Delphi, but all the priestesses would say was to bid him seek the land where men eat not Demeter's golden grain, but only acorns. So he went to Dodona, in the land of the oak trees, where the talking oaks were declared Zeus's will, and where the Selli lived, who made their bread from acorns. They could tell him, however, no more than this, that he was under the protection of the entities. They did not know where the Gorgons lived. When and how Hermes and Athens came to his help is not told in any story, but he must have known despair before they did so. At last, however, as he wandered on, he met a strange and beautiful person. We know what he looked like from many a poem. A young man with the first down upon his cheek, when youth is loveliest, carrying as no other young man ever did, a wand of gold with wings at one end, wearing a winged hat too, and winged sandals. At sight of him, hope must have entered Perseus's heart, for he would know that this could be none other than Hermes, the guide and giver of good. This radiant personage told him that before he attacked Medusa, he must first be properly equipped, and that what he needed was in the possession of the nymphs of the north. To find the nymphs' abode, they must go to the gray women, who alone could tell them the way. These women dwelt in a land where all was dim and shrouded in twilight. No ray of sun looked ever on that country, nor the moon by night. In that gray place the three women lived, all gray themselves, and withered as in extreme old age. Well, kind of like buzzards in a way, those gray heads. They were strange creatures, indeed, most of all because they had but one eye for the three, which it was their custom to take turns with, each removing it from her forehead when she had had it for a time, and handing it to another. All this Hermes told Perseus, and then he unfolded his plan. He would himself guide Perseus to them. Once there, Perseus must keep hidden until he saw one of them take the eye out of her forehead to pass it on. At that moment, when none of the three could see, he must rush forward and seize the eye, and refuse to give it back until they told him how to reach the nymphs of the north. He himself, Hermes said, would give him a sword to attack Medusa with, which could not be bent or broken by the Gorgon's scales, no matter how hard they were. This was a wonderful gift, no doubt, and yet of what use was a sword when the creature, to be struck with it, could turn the swordsman into stone before he was within striking distance? But another great entity was at hand to help. Pallas Athena stood by Perseus. She took off the shield of polished bronze which covered her breast and held it out to him. "Look into this when you attack the Gorgon," she said. "You will be able to see her in it as in a mirror, and so avoid her deadly power." Now indeed Perseus had good reason to hope. The journey to the Twilight Land was long, over the stream of ocean and on to the very border of the Black Country, where the Cimmerians dwell. But Hermes was his guide, and he could not go astray. They found the gray women at last, looking in the wavering light like gray birds, for they had the shape of swans, but their heads were human, and beneath their wings they had arms and hands. Perseus did just as Hermes had said. He held back until he saw one of them take the eye out of her forehead. Then before she could give it to her sister, he snatched it out of her hand. It was a moment or two before the three realized they had lost it. Each thought one of the others had it, but Perseus spoke out and told them that he had taken it, and that it would be theirs again only when they showed him how to find the nymphs of the north. It's like gnomes or elves or something. Well, in, the quadrant sort of way of dividing things, right? They gave him full direction at once. They would have done anything to get their eye back. He returned it to them and went on the way they had pointed out to him. He was bound, although he did not know it, to the blessed country of the Hyperboreans, at the back of the north wind, which it is said, and neither by ship nor yet by land shall one find the wondrous road to the gathering place of the Hyperboreans. But Perseus had Hermes with him, so that the road lay open to him, and he reached that host of happy people who are always banqueting and holding joyful revelry. They showed him great kindness. They welcomed him to their feasts, and the maidens, dancing to the sound of the flute and lyre, paused to get for him the gifts he sought. These were 3 winged sandals, a magic wallet, which would always become the right size for whatever was to be carried in it, and, most important of all, a cap, which made the wearer invisible. With these, and with Athena's shield, and Hermes' sword, Perseus was ready for the Gorgons. Hermes knew where they lived, and leaving the happy land, the 2 flew back across ocean and over the sea to the terrible Sisters' Island. By great good fortune, they were all asleep when Perseus found them. In the mirror of the bright shield, he could see them clearly, creatures with great wings and bodies covered with golden scales and hair, a mass of twisting snakes. Athena was beside him now, as well as Hermes. They told him which one was Medusa, and that was important, for she alone of the 3 could be killed. The other 2 were immortal. Perseus, on his winged sandals, hovered above them, looking, however, only at the shield. Then he aimed a stroke down at Medusa's throat, and Athena guided his hand. With a single sweep of his sword, he cut through her neck, and his eyes still fixed on the shield, with never a glance at her, he swooped low enough to seize the head. He dropped it into the wallet, which closed around it. He had nothing to fear from it now, but the 2 other Gorgons had awakened and, horrified at the sight of their sister slain, tried to pursue the slayer. Perseus was safe. He had on the cap of darkness, and they could not find him. So over the sea, rich-haired Danae's son, Perseus on his winged sandals sped, flying swift as thought. In a wallet of silver, a wonder to behold, he bore the head of the monster, while Hermes, the son of Maia, the messenger of Zeus, kept ever at his side. On his way back, he came to Ethiopia and alighted there. By this time Hermes had left him. Perseus found, as Hercules was later to find, that a lovely maiden had been given up to be devoured by a horrible sea serpent. Her name was Andromeda, and she was the daughter of a silly, vain woman that stared Ethiop Queen, that starred Ethiop Queen, who strove to set her beauty's praise above the sea nymphs and their power offended. She had boasted that she was more beautiful than the daughters of Nereus, the sea god. An entity considered to be a sea god. An absolutely certain way in those days to draw down on one a wretched fate was to claim superiority in anything over anything that wanted to be considered a deity. Nevertheless, people were perpetually doing so. In this case, the punishment for the arrogance the entities detested fell not on Queen Cassiopeia, Andromeda's mother, but on her daughter. The Ethiopians were being devoured in numbers by the serpent, and learning from the oracle that they could be freed from the pest only if Andromeda were offered up to it. They forced Perseus, her father, to consent. When Perseus arrived, the maiden was on a rocky ledge by the sea, chained there to wait for the coming of the monster. Perseus saw her, and on the instant loved her. He waited beside her until the great snake came for its prey. Then he cut his head off, just as he had cut the Gorgons. The headless body dropped back into the water. Perseus took Andromeda to her parents and asked for her hand, which they gladly gave him. Now, regarding Aquarius to Aries, Aquarius, Pisces, Aries, we have parts of this story represented. You might want to turn to my Astrology Without Idolatry programs. So I guess you know, the monsters bewailing on the crags amongst the sea. Um, Perseus flying, holding out the Medusa head with all the snakes and whatnot. I don't know if it's 10 snakes again. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2. Okay, I guess it is 10 snakes again, but there's 3 dots. I don't. But yeah, he's holding the face away from himself, in other words. But flying through the air for some reason. With her, he sailed back to the island and his mother, but in the house where he had lived so long, he found no one. The fisherman, Dictys' wife, was long since dead, and the 2 others, Danae and the man who had been like a father to Perseus, had to fly and hide themselves from Polydectes, who was furious at Danae's refusal to marry him. They had taken refuge in a temple. Perseus was told, he learned also, that the king was holding a banquet in the palace, and all the men who favored him were gathered there. Perseus instantly saw his opportunity. He went straight to the palace and entered the hall. As he stood at the entrance, Athena's shining buckler on his breast, the silver wallet at his side, he drew the eyes of every man there. Then before any could look away, he held up the Gorgon's head, and at the sight, one and all, the cruel king and his servile courtiers, were turned into stone. There they sat, a row of statues, each, as it were, frozen stiff in the altitude. He struck when he first saw Perseus. When the islanders knew themselves freed from the tyrant, it was easy for Perseus to find Danae and Dictys. He made Dictys king of the island, but he and his mother decided that they would go back with Andromeda to Greece and try to be reconciled to Acrisius to see if the many years that had passed since he had put them in the chest had not softened him, so that he would be glad to receive his daughter and grandson. When they reached Argos, however, they found that Acrisius had been driven away from the city, and where he was no one could say. It happened that soon after their arrival, Perseus heard that the king of Larissa in the north was holding a great athletic contest, and he journeyed there to take part in the discus throwing. When his turn came, and he hurled the heavy missile, it swerved and fell among the spectators. Acrisius was there on a visit to the king, and the discus struck him. The blow was fatal, and he died at once. So Apollo's oracle was again proved true. If Perseus felt any grief, at least he knew that his grandfather had done his best to kill him and his mother. With his death, their troubles came to an end. Perseus and Andromeda lived happily ever after. Their son, Electryon, was the grandfather of Hercules. Medusa's head was given to Athena, who bore it always upon the Aegis, Zeus's shield, which she carried for him.